Kenpachi Zaraki, a powerful and ruthless combatant that exists within the top tiers of the Bleach universe. A swordsman so formidable that Yuha, the father of Quincy's, declared him a war threat. A Shinigami so powerful that even the concept of blocking has no value when facing him. Calling Kenpachi a force to be reckoned with would be a massive understatement of his power, and due to his recent showings in the Bleach anime and his fight against the most powerful Quincy, I wanted to throw Kenpachi into a universe outside of his own and let him run amok in order to see how the Kenpachi would fare against the likes of an entire verse of characters. As you may have been able to tell from the title and thumbnail, the verse in question is none other than Jujutsu Kaisen. How would Kenpachi fare against the likes of Jujutsu Kaisen's strongest characters? Would he be able to brute force his way through a verse with this many different types of unique abilities? Or would someone be able to stop the rampage of Soul Society's supposed strongest? Before we jump into the scaling itself, I think it's necessary to very quickly explain the ground rules of this hypothetical. Kenpachi will be plucked from the Bleach universe in his end of manga form and thrown into the middle of an infinite, indestructible realm similar to the Muken in Bleach. In this realm, every single character in Jujutsu Kaisen will also be placed bloodlusted but still in character in every other regard. The characters of Jujutsu Kaisen will be solely attempting to kill Kenpachi, and as such will be working together to the best of their abilities to do so. Kenpachi will be bloodlusted and in character as well, so basically, just Kenpachi in his normal state. Neither side of this matchup knows the other's abilities unless they are able to deduce them within the scope of the fight. All of the abilities that they would normally have access to within their respective universes exist within this dimension, and as such they can fight to their fullest. Now, with these rules established, let's quickly take a look first at Kenpachi's abilities. When taking a look at the attack potency or raw power of Kenpachi in the Thousand Year Blood War, there are a few different ways to go about scaling him. The most conservative estimate of his power would come from the meteor-splitting feat he performed in his fight against Gremmy. In this moment, Kenpachi is able to release his Shikai and absolutely destroy the Serate-threatening meteor that Gremmy had summoned. Due to the size and speed of said meteor, this feat has been calced to be about continental level in terms of attack potency. Obviously, with Bankai, Kenpachi would exceed their striking power by anywhere from 5 to 10 times, placing him even higher in these continental ranges. This is definitely impressive as he would have to be outputting several petatons of energy even on the lower end, but even this level of power is nothing to the likes of Kenpachi when you take a look at some of his higher end scaling. When being a bit more generous to the full power of Kenpachi, you can refer to Yuha's assessment of him back in the first invasion, noting that Kenpachi is a war potential, but also commenting that Yamamoto was not one of the 5 war potentials, and rightfully so. Now at a glance this may not seem all that important, simply because we see with characters like Ichibei and Urahara, that being one of the 5 war potentials does not mean that in terms of physical stats you are one of the strongest characters in the series. Ichibei is said to be a war potential because of his wisdom, and Kisuke is a war potential because of his seemingly infinite amount of tricks. What's more important than just being a war potential threat is noting why that character in question holds that rank. In Kenpachi's case, Yuha deems him to be one of the most dangerous people that oppose him simply because of his battle power or combat strength. In simple terms, Kenpachi's raw strength is what makes him so terrifying to Yuha. Rather than having any complex reason for his high evaluation, Kenpachi achieves the wariness of a god-tier Bleach character simply because of his high combat ability. The fact that Yamamoto isn't on this list and Kenpachi is, means that, at least in terms of physical abilities like speed, strength, stamina, and durability, Kenpachi should be superior to the likes of Yamamoto. This isn't to say that Yamamoto would lose to Kenpachi outright, but when they are just clashing blades, Kenpachi should be in an advantageous position. Yamamoto is a character so powerful that the mere unleashing of his Bankai put not just the Serate, but the entire Soul Society in danger of being destroyed. This fact holds so much weight because the Soul Society is meant to mirror the world of the living, meaning that even when downplayed to its greatest extent, Yamamoto in Bankai is passively able to threaten the integrity of the Soul Society. But saying that this feat is planetary may even be downplay in itself. You see, it's mentioned by Tozen that stars exist within the realm of Soul Society, and as such, being able to destroy the entire realm includes the stars and the distance between them. This is corroborated by the fact that Gremmy opens up a hole that contains numerous visible stars and throws Kenpachi inside, meaning that the world of the living, and by proxy the Soul Society, is larger than an entire planet and actually houses numerous celestial bodies. With all of this taken into account, Yamamoto should be able to output solar system levels of power with his attacks at the bare minimum. Kenpachi having a higher combat strength should mean that he scales to this level of output. As in Bleach, you can't harm someone unless your attacks are relative in Reiatsu volume. The ambiguous part of the scaling is determining whether or not Kenpachi would be able to achieve this level of strength in base, Shikai, or Bankai, but even if you aren't charitable to him in any way, and say that he can only reach this level in his Bankai form, his base striking power would still be completely ridiculous and would utterly surpass the continental levels of power I mentioned he could have earlier. His durability should also scale very closely to his attack power, due to his body only being unable to contain its own power when he's in his Bankai for extended periods of time. When he is in Shikai in base form, he shows no issues containing his incredible strength, and as such can only really be lowballed at the absolute bare minimum to having continental levels of durability for the reasons I mentioned earlier. Unlike his AP and durability, Kenpachi's speed doesn't have many different avenues to be scaled and isn't really that contentious. There are multiple different ways to scale him to light speed. Even within the Soul Society arc, there are numerous different characters who display light speed or relativistic speed feats, and it would simply be absurd to say that Kenpachi now is below that or even relative to characters of an arc that early in the series. In Soul Society, we have feats like Uryu literally outspeeding his shadow, a fatigued base Shuhei dodging the Negacion, something that is stated to just outright be light, or even Ichigo in the first arc of the series blocking a Sero, something which in the data books is mentioned to be spiritual light. As I said earlier, all of these feats are calced to be either relativistic or faster than light in nature, and Kenpachi is significantly faster than any of the aforementioned characters, even at the very start of the 1,000-year Blood War. I could attempt to get into calculating exactly how much faster Kenpachi is, but as you'll see when I get to scaling the Jujutsu Kaisen verse, it doesn't really matter how much faster Kenpachi is than Light, only that he is, and by a decent margin. This level of speed should scale to Kenpachi's combat and travel speed alike, as we see Shunpo, the main form of high-speed movement for Shinigami, be used in both travel and combat feats. Now that I've covered Kenpachi's physical abilities, I'd like to quickly go over the hacks that he possesses before diving into the scaling of the Jujutsu Kaisen universe. Kenpachi possesses the standard Soul Reaper abilities that damn near everyone in Bleach has. This includes having a resistance to soul-based attacks, as he is simply a soul himself, being able to attack the soul and cleanse it with his Zanpakuto, being invisible to the naked eye, and minor spiritual sensory abilities. On the more unique side of his hacks, Kenpachi seems to possess a low-level resistance to durability negation, being able to toughen up his internal organs with Reiatsu, as mentioned in his fight with Theon Grants. His attacks also seem to have a non-physical component to them as well, at least in his amped forms, as when Gremmy attempts to kill him by throwing him into the vacuum of space, Kenpachi is able to simply cut the space itself with his blade and actually grab it and open the rift further. If this feat is taken as supporting evidence for the claim that there is nothing he can't cut, then you could argue that his released Zanpakuto has some sort of durability or space manipulation properties, although some later feats may put that idea into question. All in all, Kenpachi doesn't really possess that many unique hacks, much unlike a vast majority of his contemporaries. Rather, he much prefers to get down into the nitty-gritty aspects of a fight and just go sword for sword and blow for blow. With everything on his end being scaled, it's time to dive into the world of Jujutsu Kaisen and evaluate its power before pitting these two forces against one another. Jujutsu Kaisen is a world that has a wide range of characters power-wise, but for the sake of putting the verse's best foot forward, when I go over the universe's physical stat potential, I will be using the more powerful characters in the series like Gojo, Sukuna, Geto, Yuta, every other special grade sorcerer, and the disaster special grades for feats. With that being said, the range that exists for Jujutsu Kaisen's top tiers, AP-wise at least, depends solely on if you want to use pixel scaling and calcs exclusively, in which case you can get them to about city level, or if you wanted to use things like domains as an apt example for their cursed energy output. The city level scaling comes from Jogo's maximum meteor attack, and it's been calced several times to be in those city level ranges, and does function as an effective low ball for the verse's attack potency, especially when you consider that Jogo was by no means one of the strongest or most powerful characters in the verse thus far. Being more generous, you can use the character's domain expansions to scale their maximum output. Dagon being able to construct an entire island with his cursed energy would then place him and everybody else in the verse that scales to him around island level, a pretty big jump from just the city level AP that they would have if you just use calcs. Everybody in the Disaster Curse family and sorcerers that could beat Dagon in a fight should all scale above this island level of power, and characters like Gojo and Sukuna should be surpassing this level of AP numerous times over due to their overwhelming dominance in the Jujutsu Kaisen universe. Now, there are a couple of different, more super highballed ways to scale the god tiers of the verse, mainly being Sukuna and Gojo, but I'll dive more into that when I talk about how I think this confrontation goes down. When it comes to the speed of the JJK verse, it gets a little bit weird. Because of this damn now ya Mach 3 statement, the Jujutsu Kaisen verse has been recently downplayed to cap out at Mach 3 even for the top tiers. And I understand why people would take this statement and run with it, seeing as how it is just one of the most clear-cut ways to scale higher level characters in the verse. Hell, in this video, I don't even want to get into the validity of it versus the other feats that may contradict it. Just know that for the sake of this video and for the sake of putting Jujutsu Kaisen's best foot forward, I am going to be using Mach 3 as a low end for the verse's top tiers, and take into account feats and statements that place them a bit higher. If you are someone who completely agrees with the Mach 3 being a realistic cap of the verse's speed, that's completely fine. Just take what I'm about to say next as a bit of a highball. The first of the more generous speed scaling feats comes from Maki catching a bullet in her fight against Mai. This feat has been calced out to be about high hypersonic plus, or about 50 times the speed of sound, and considering that at this point in time, Maki isn't anywhere near the top of the verse speed-wise, it's safe to say that a large amount of the Jujutsu Kaisen universe scales to this level of speed. Plenty of characters are able to outspeed and outright blitz Maki at this level of speed, including Naobito, and should be significantly faster than her baseline high hypersonic feat. This isn't super inconsistent either, seeing as how Yuji, Irame, and Kenjaku all show varying levels of ability to completely void or at least react to the top speed of piercing blood, an attack which is stated to surpass the speed of sound itself. Characters that are closer to that Yuji and Irame tier of speed definitely have some trouble reacting to it, or at least see it as a fast technique, but when you look at special grade level sorcerers like Kenjaku, you can see that dodging something faster than sound is a casual feat for him, as well as every other high level JJK combatant. You can take their scaling one step further if you take a look at Hikari's fight with Kashimo. In this fight, we see that Hikari is capable of reacting to the lightning bolt sent directly towards his head, and he's able to narrowly avoid the attack, taking it to his arm instead. Being able to react to lightning based attacks should push the higher tiered characters into that massively hypersonic echelon, which means that they could potentially be 100 times faster than the speed of sound. Just like with the attack potency, there is a significantly more highballed way to scale characters like Gojo and Sukuna speed-wise. However, that once again will be covered in the matchup portion of this video. Before we get into that, however, let's talk about the hacks and abilities that the Jujutsu Kaisen universe has to offer. There is a laundry list of techniques that could be used and may be useful in a fight, so rather than painstakingly cover every single one in great detail and inevitably bore you guys, I'm going to brush over an assortment of abilities that have some potential, and then dig deeper for the super powerful hacks of the verse. In Jujutsu Kaisen, abilities like soul manipulation, spatial manipulation, mass manipulation, matter manipulation, probability manipulation, durability negation, teleportation, and dozens of other abilities all exist. Rather than cover every single hex in the verse, I'll give a very brief overview of the abilities I find to be the most notable, and cover more specific scenarios later in the video. One of the more notable abilities in the Jujutsu Kaisen universe is the domain expansion, which forces someone into a pocket reality in which attacks are guaranteed to hit no matter what. Regardless of speed, sure hit domains will hit their targets unless a counter domain technique is used, which, spoiler alert, Kenpachi doesn't have a counter domain technique. Unlimited Void is a domain that pushes infinite amounts of information into the opponent's mind, immobilizing them due to the overwhelming amount of knowledge shoved into their brain simultaneously. Domains like Time Cell Moon Palace force an opponent to make 24 movements per second on a cellular level, making it impossible for anyone targeted inside of the domain to move without literally tearing themselves apart. Sukura's Malevolent Shrine simply bombard someone with an endless amount of slashing attacks that adjust to your durability. Some domains have the ability to confiscate your power, others can manipulate and transfigure your soul with a single touch, others are just basically a big slot machine, etc, etc, etc. The point is, domain expansions are extremely useful, especially when used against someone who is significantly faster than you. Outside of the realm of domain expansions, techniques like the Limitless prove to be useful in just about every versus battle. Reverse Curse technique, which allows someone to heal themselves and others mid-battle, is also useful. The ability to turn things that you find funny into reality is a surprisingly broken technique. Shadow Manipulation, Poison, Curse Speech, and Power Negation are also abilities that are useful and present within the Jujutsu Kaisen universe. As you can see, JJK has some really powerful and diverse abilities. Some of these abilities even allow one to deal with characters that surpass them in physical capabilities. Will it be enough, or will the raw power of Kenpachi Zaraki just be too much for the verse? Let's find out. When it comes to making this matchup happen, I'd like to quickly establish a few things, as I can already envision the comments talking about this down below. For one, I'm not going to be assuming that JJK characters can't see Kenpachi or that Kenpachi can't see Cursed Spirits. That's just kind of boring and defeats the purpose of pitting these two characters against each other. And secondly, both sides of this battle have the ability to see or sense supernatural, normally invisible entities anyway, meaning that in a verse that is equalized like this, they would be able to see each other. With that being said, you may have been able to surmise this just by listening to the scaling presented up to this point, but it's pretty clear that in terms of pure physical abilities, Kenpachi outclasses the entire Jujutsu Kaisen universe, and it's not really close. In comparison to the island levels of attack potency that higher level characters in the verse have, even on the low end, Kenpachi is hundreds of times more powerful than that, meaning that any attack that doesn't have any sort of hacks applied to it wouldn't even tickle Kenpachi. Red, blue, dismantle, cleave, black flash amped attacks, nothing that relies purely on physical might of a character would even begin to touch even a downplayed Kenpachi. Even hacks-based abilities like Toji and Maki's Soul Splitter or Mahito's Idol Transfiguration would prove ineffective simply because Kenpachi himself is a soul, and as such has much more powerful soul feats than any of the characters in Jujutsu Kaisen. In terms of speed, the Jujutsu Kaisen universe is also severely outclassed, even when looking at the fastest feats they pull off. They really are only reaching those massively hypersonic ranges. In comparison to Kenpachi, even downplayed, he's like light speed. This would mean that even if you really lowball Kenpachi and really highball the Jujutsu Kaisen top tiers, Kenpachi would be dozens of times faster than anyone within the Jujutsu Kaisen universe. So now that we know that Kenpachi is way stronger and faster than JJK as a whole, and that's something you probably already knew if you were familiar with Bleach, what about Jujutsu Kaisen's ace in the hole, right? What about its diverse set of abilities? In order to determine whether or not those hacks would be able to make the difference, let's take a look at how some of them interact with Kenpachi. As I already mentioned, any hacks within the series that deals with soul manipulation or soul destruction just isn't going to work on Kenpachi, nor would Mahito's immunity to attacks that aren't aimed at the soul matter much, because Kenpachi is a powerful soul and demolishes powerful soul-based characters on a regular basis. Then we look to characters with domain expansions. Maybe they can deal with the likes of Kenpachi. If they have a sure hit technique, then the speed gap wouldn't matter, and while this is true, considering Kenpachi's nature when it comes to fighting people that are obviously weaker than him, I doubt that he'd even allow them to get a word in, cutting them down before they get the chance to do anything. I mean, we see this all the time when Kenpachi faces fodder characters. He doesn't really have the temperament to play around. Even if he did, the problem with facing Bleach characters with hacks is, in Bleach, if you are simply way more powerful than your opponent, you can cancel out their hacks abilities by sheer force of will and Ryatsu. Aizen mentions this in his fight with the captains as Soifun stabs him twice with Suzumebachi, an attack that should kill an opponent instantly if two attacks are landed in the same place. Because of the gap between Aizen and her in power, her attack does nothing and proves to be completely ineffective, which is a problem for these JJK characters because, as I've already established, they aren't really hanging with a lowballed Kenpachi, meaning hacks like Purple, Dismantle, and Cleave, Takuba's Comedian, Nanako's Phone Manipulation, Higuruma's Domain Expansion, and so many other of the abilities that exist within the Jujutsu Kaisen universe would simply prove to be ineffective against Kenpachi. What about those super highballed levels of AP and speed that I mentioned earlier in the video? How does that version of this fight go? Well, for starters, let's take a look at how high you can get these JJK characters when you abandon all desire for consistency. On the back of the first Jujutsu Kaisen volume cover, we have a statement about Ryomen Sukuna and his full power, in which it states, the power of all of Sukuna's collected power is enough to destroy the world. Now, if you ignore all the context of what this could mean specifically in Jujutsu Kaisen and take this to its utmost extreme, you would be able to say that 20 Finger Sukuna should be planetary. Gojo, being a character who has been called the pinnacle of the verse and the strongest character alive numerous times within the series, and by Gege himself, should at least be relative to this, making him planetary as well. For speed, you have Gojo's feat of moving in the prison realm, a dimension which is said to not have time pass. If you look at this feat extremely generously and assume that Gojo is able to move here not by simply being able to manipulate space-time, he would end up having some level of speed that is beyond infinitely linear, which basically just means he's way faster than Kenpachi. Sukuna should likely scale somewhere in the ballpark of Gojo's speed, considering that they're kind of implied to be relative in terms of overall ability. So since I'm feeling so generous, we'll grant him beyond Kenpachi's speed as well, to the point where he's blitzing him. If you use the absolute highest of highballs for Sukuna and Gojo and lowball Kenpachi to a ridiculous degree, then yes, the verse of Jujutsu Kaisen beats him. But as I have tried to convey many times throughout this video, the only way you can get JJK characters even in the dimension of Kenpachi is through convoluted and downright disingenuous scaling on their side and ridiculous downplay on Kenpachi's. Even when dealing with something like the Limitless, in a normal scenario where Gojo's massively hypersonic speeds and island level in terms of his attack power, he'd eventually pull out a domain expansion, seeing as how none of his base attacks would work on Kenpachi. The domain also wouldn't work because Kenpachi is able to simply ignore the hacks via his raw power. Then once the domain is finished and Gojo's technique is temporarily disabled, Kenpachi would cleave him in two, effectively finishing off the verse. So in case my opinion wasn't clear up to this point, Kenpachi stomps.